In this presentation, Matt, Michelle, and I will be first introducing the three articles the lesson is based on, followed by more in-depth information about the ability to create moments where the speaker saves face and is allowed to say no through the use of modals of politeness, which is then followed by the presentation of the lesson and concluding remarks. In our daily lives, we communicate general information, ideas, beliefs, values, emotions, and attitudes to one another. Linguists Seltzer and Olstein assert that in these interactions, the social, cultural, and physical aspects of any given situation determines the context in which we communicate with each other. We use language to establish and maintain relationships throughout our lives, and because of this, we try to cooperate with each other, in part by using body language and gestures, tone of voice, best choice of words, and more. Yet, the context of the situation is crucial in deciding not only the content, but the appropriate stress, rhythm, and intonation of the utterances people speak. For students who are from every conceivable cultural background and language, navigating English in everyday life can be rather difficult. Both teachers and researchers alike have found that students may demonstrate a general proficiency of English, yet still lack pragmatic competence while communicating in the language. In order to communicate effectively in our daily lives, we must have the knowledge and ability to use language appropriately for any situation. However, according to Casper's 1997 research, many students tend towards a more literal interpretation with someone who is speaking to them, while often taking their words at face value rather than inferring the true meaning of what has been said. As a result, depending on the context, these situations can prove challenging and problematic for both the speaker and the listener. It is vital for English language learners to be able to comprehend what politeness means in order for them to use appropriate discourse within their everyday lives. As language instructors, we tend to correct learners on their grammar, pronunciation, and inaccuracies in functional exponents. Yet equally important is to have students engage in collaborative activities that allow instructors to offer feedback in terms of the language concerning politeness. Instructors should guide learners as to whether and to what degree they used appropriate intonation to sound polite, if they used language of the correct tenor for roles, statuses, and relationships, if they took their turn at the right time, showed appreciation for other individuals' contributions, and apologized for interrupting, unless it was absolutely necessary, and so on. The concept of politeness varies throughout cultures, and because of this, it carries a complexity of meanings for many different groups within their own societies. Seltzer, Mercier, and Olstein define politeness as something that is used to enhance social harmony. Brown and Levinson, whose politeness theory was originally presented in 1978, consisted of two specific parts, the first being their fundamental theory dealing with the nature of politeness and how it functions, and the second dealing with politeness strategies. Next up, Michelle will discuss the three research articles the lesson is based on.
This presentation is based on research that shows how important it is for students to acquire and learn pragmatic knowledge. The first article demonstrates that explicit instruction is necessary to improve the student's ability to use polite words with the appropriate intonation for common social interactions. In this 2011 study, Gu investigated the request strategies of non-native speaker responses compared to native speakers. Conducted in a Chinese EFL classroom, the study employed both implicit and explicit instructions designed to help students learn and understand pragmatic knowledge and appropriateness for online communication. The results of the study indicate that students learn best through explicit instructions of request strategies. The main takeaway from this research is that Gu found that although students may be generally proficient in the language, they lack the pragmatic competence to effectively communicate in particular social contexts. In this instance, what was found is that students lacked the ability to write or speak in a way that showed how to communicate in the appropriate level of formality, directness, and politeness in the language. However, The researcher did find that through explicit instructions, students showed greater awareness towards pragmatic competence in authentic intercultural communications. In the next article, in 2007, scientist Chen conducted a study involving the interlanguage requests between Chinese and English speakers and how social hierarchy plays a role in or affects EFL's learners' choice of strategy used while communicating. Chen found that for Chinese learners, their culture plays a significant role in how they respond to the speaker. Specifically, what was found is that word choice and deference towards social hierarchy deterred students from appropriately fully utilizing their linguistic resources in particular social contexts. Chen's studies showed that pragmatic competence really depends on certain social, cultural, and social linguistic abilities. Finally, in the last article in 2015, scientist Al-Oatabi investigated Saudi EFL students' pragmatic knowledge through a written short answer questionnaire, which was collected all online. That compared the use of pragmatics in between native students enrolled at a university in the UK and Saudi students majoring in English and completing their final year at a university in KSA. The study indicated that both groups of students used indirect requests. However, the non-native speakers showed limited knowledge of pragmatics and discourse. Namely, the students demonstrated limited knowledge and awareness in employing appropriate strategies and syntactic and lexical modifiers compared to native speakers. The examples of lexical and syntactic modifiers that were investigated in the study include could, can, would, possibly, and please. Now Matt will discuss politeness of modal verbs in discourse.
The focus for this short presentation will be on the politeness of modal verbs in discourse. Modal verbs are utilized, like other aspects of language, in that they can be analyzed from a pragmatic perspective, used to show various meanings or acts, including requesting, ordering, asking for permission, and so on. Discourse analysis is the interpretation of the language in the context of use, concerned with spoken language and written texts, in different figures of speech, from conversations to high forms of talk, according to McCarthy. Our focus in terms of language learners is the ESL student at the intermediate to advanced levels. These learners should be aware of how to use politeness of modal verbs in discourse, as they are at levels that require these types of knowledge and skills. Students should be aware, for example, of modal verbs such as can, used with interrogative and declarative sentences, as it can be used to express permission, possibility, and ability. Will, to continue, can be used when talking about the future, usually focusing on promises and requests. In addition, must expresses obligation and necessity, located in declarative and interrogative sentences. More on modals of politeness from Glenn.
Other modals, such as could and would, relate to possibility. The primary function of these words is to relate to possible outcomes in references to utterances, but they are also used to create politeness for a similar reason. Instead of using please or thank you to be polite, modals of possibility allow interlocutors a chance to refuse a request without losing face. When a locutor gives this opportunity, it is viewed as polite because it maintains the current relationship and allows for multiple outcomes. In comparison, sentences without modals can be viewed as impolite at times. If a person says, "Give me some water," it is rude because it demands a certain outcome without the possible options that could be derived from adjusting the sentence. "Could I have a glass of water?" is an example of allowing interlocutors to refuse a request without being rude themselves. Authority is another example of politeness that may be more familiar to ESL students. Different languages such as French and Spanish have different forms of addressing others by respected titles such as vous and vosotros. Addressing authority using may as a modal is another form of politeness. Asking permission from another person is submissive. When we ask, "May I borrow your pencil?" authority is shifted in order to gain permission for an action. Just as the modal of possibility have secondary function of politeness, this strategy allows the person in the position in authority to confirm or deny their request without altering relationships. Next, Matt will present the modals of politeness lesson.
Teaching politeness in adult ESL can be broken down into 4 different parts, with an assortment of exercises and activities: simple politeness, agency, authority, and reversal. For our context, the students already have an understanding of modals from their foundations grammar courses. We will dive into discourse and secondary use of our modals. Politeness can be broken down into these 4 different categories that are included in this lesson. The student learning outcomes are that at the end of the lesson, students will be able to identify, replicate, and create politeness using please and thank you, face-saving strategies, and cultural norms. Students will also be able to avoid creating overly polite utterances, leading to awkward conversations among friends and family. First is conversation. Students will warm up by creating politeness with simple polite words or phrases that they know, like please and thank you. Some parts of discourse carry a social value of politeness on their own. A comparison that works in this way are words referencing time. Today, tomorrow, and yesterday are time words without any other value. Simple additions to sentences to add politeness in conversation are great ways to introduce the topic of politeness. For this short part of the lesson, we will use conversation and example sentences on our handout to see what students already understand. Next, students will create their own sentences using polite words. An example to differentiate between the students' options in conversation would be to make a simple request. Different contexts may be presented by the teacher to progress discussion. Each part of the lesson begins with discussion and ends with explicit instruction, as it is more effective for learners to retain information. This is the foundation used to create an understanding of pragmatics and introduce our topic. Now that students have warmed up with words containing simple values of politeness, we can begin to look at deeper meaning in alternative structures using modals. Next, relationships. In conversation, there's always a value set on the relationship between two people. Agency, when making a request, shows the burden of the possible future actions. The difference in agency influences the answer received. If I ask someone to lend me their lawnmower, they are the agent. Minimizing imposition should always be the goal when looking to implement politeness strategies. Removing the burden by asking to borrow their lawnmower is more polite. Additionally, using modals to create an opportunity for the interlocutor to refuse a request is a great practice. Giving the option of refusal often increases the request's success. Students work in this scenario during section 2 of the handout. Third, permission and adopting cultural norms are changed by one particular modal. May is used to request permission. Different cultural norms come into play in this exercise. Students will differentiate politeness strategies between figures of authority and informal figures in part 3 of the handout. Last, students must be aware that they can be too polite or use politeness when it is not needed. Using too many modals or building blocks of politeness can be perceived as insincere. Politeness addresses the necessity to be formal, which creates distance between interlocutors. While most acquaintances may find politeness to be a positive aspect of communication, it can be viewed as negative in reference to friends at times.
In conclusion, throughout our daily lives, in order to communicate effectively, we must have the knowledge and ability to use language appropriately for any social situation. Language is used to establish and maintain relationship throughout our lives. And although the concept of politeness varies throughout different cultures, for every society it is always used to enhance social harmony. However, research has shown that although students may have a general proficiency in English, with some even previously acquiring the knowledge and vocabulary needed for discourses, will still struggle to communicate appropriately in social situations. Based on this research and other foundational knowledge in linguistics, in this presentation, Matt, Michelle, and I discussed modals of politeness in discourse and then presented a lesson teaching politeness to intermediate level adult ESL learners that incorporates current research demonstrating that without explicit instructions and practice, students simply lack the pragmatic knowledge to have fluency in the language. We hope that you enjoyed our presentation and appreciate your thoughts and feedback.